It's already happening in some parts of the world. And some scientists say that if we continue to produce greenhouse gases at this rate, we could see an increase in insect pests. Global warming not only causes a rise in the number of pests, but also increases their appetite. As it is, in one day, a swarm of locusts the size of Tampines and Changi can destroy enough food crops to feed everyone in Singapore 10 times over. Currently, 10 to 15% of our global crop production is lost to pests. But each additional degree of temperature increase could cause global yields to drop by a further 10 to 25%. But while our food supply may be threatened by climate change, our current diets are contributing to it. From raising animals, growing vegetables, from processing to shipping. If you eat, you're part of the food system that accounts for up to a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions.
Isn't it about time we reduce this figure? And what if this could be part of the solution? I think this is the hardest episode I'm going to do, because I'm confronting something that's so central to life here in Singapore.
In this series, I've revealed how our plastic addiction is causing a strain on the environment.
That's disgusting. I was just aware of all the plastic and all the trash.
And our need for more and more and more power is forcing us to look for alternative sources that aren't always readily available.
And how much solar we generate in Singapore is still very small. We will always be limited in space, unfortunately.
Plastic and energy. Are they the only culprits that pop into your mind when you think about climate change?
Perhaps you've never considered the impact of this. What we eat.
We are a land of incredible food.
We go everywhere just to eat. So much of our food dictates, our whole lifestyle in a way.
People travel from far and wide to eat here.
Singapore is the best food, I think.
Very vibrant and very exotic.
The world acknowledges us for it.
Singapore's hawker culture is now on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage list.
We greet each other with it.
Sudah makan? 你吃了吗?
But did you know that globally our food systems have higher carbon emissions than the entire transport sector? Perhaps that's why the very first chapter of this essay collection about climate change in Singapore is about our delicious chili crab. I'm meeting Xiao Yun, the author of the essay Eating Chili Crab in the Anthropocene, to find out why she chose to write about our favorite crustacean.
Hi, Xiaoyun. How are you? Hello. How are you doing?
Good, good.
So I was looking at your essay in this book, and now we're literally eating chili crab.
Right. I love seafood. Seafood is a big part of Singaporean culture too.
I don't know, is this going to get messy?
Yeah, I mean, you're wearing pink.
So this is messy as well, right? The subject, this issue.
Yeah. So I thought that food was actually a very easy segue for most Singaporeans into the topic of climate change.
So how much of a climate change issue then is chili crab?
This crab is 1.5 kg. Per kg is like 4.86 kilograms of carbon emissions. We import about like 5,500 crabs in a day. I think because of how the scale of its marketing as a tool for like attracting tourists to come to Singapore and marketing our sense of like heritage and culture, maybe it's not that sustainable, right?
Singapore imported $55.9 million worth of crabs in 2019, making us the world's largest net importer of fresh and chilled crabs by dollar value per capita.
Especially when it's affected by monsoons, crab supplies actually face crunches of up to 30%. I mean, definitely the weather exacerbates this problem, but also that our demand for this food has outpaced its ability to reproduce itself.
But surely that must be a global problem associated with increased consumption everywhere.
It's a global problem, but like many things, right, we can't just like exonerate ourselves because, as you know, we are diversifying our import sources. So our demand and also like global demand for these seafoods is actually affecting mangrove habitats. And the mangrove forest has to be cleared from places like Indonesia, Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, and as far as the east coast of Africa.
So that's a direct link, because I've learned earlier in this series about how mangroves serve an important role in sucking carbon out of the atmosphere.
So do you think we, as Singaporeans, need to change our eating habits for the sake of climate change?
I think it begins with realizing that cultural practices, such as eating certain foods, is no longer aligned with how we want to be. Because Singapore is saying how we want to increase our climate ambition, right? So part of that is like eating more sustainably. So your food choices does help you reduce your carbon footprint. Going plant-based, supporting local farms, would actually really reduce your carbon footprint.
Do you think that Singaporeans are ready for this and keen for this? I mean, food is a central part of our identity, isn't it?
I think we need to persuade Singaporeans, yes.
And what do you think it will take to persuade them?
I think that's why we need to make it not just an environmental issue. I know we're in an episode about climate change, but it's not just climate change, you know, and it's about like health reasons. Being more plant-based or eating less red meat. Yeah.
So it's not purely about climate change then?
Yeah. It's a messy issue.
Yeah, I definitely. Okay. Okay. We should just stop eating.
Who am I kidding? I don't just love my chili crab, I love all food. I'm sure most of us feel the same way.
But Xiao Yun says that what we eat matters. And if Singapore doesn't take steps to reduce the greenhouse gases in relation to what we eat, by 2030, the total emissions from the sector will increase by 19%.
This is according to a research team from A-Star. After finding that most food-related climate studies were done about the US and Europe, they decided it would be remiss not to conduct one on our foodie nation. Dr. John's team picked 13 of our favorite food items and used what's called a life cycle analysis to carefully calculate emissions from every stage of their production. It took his team 5 months to do the math, and now he's asked to meet me here.
And what did you find?
Beef is the major culprit. It's equivalent to 150 hours of leaving your 100-watt light bulb turned on at home.
This piece of beef?
Yes, just 250 grams.
That's about 6 kilograms of carbon emissions for this piece of beef.
My goodness. So how does this compare with the other meats? Let's say I substitute my 250 grams of beef for chicken. What effect would I have?
For the chicken, it's about 21 hours and 30 minutes.
That's about 1/6 of the effect.
Yes, that's right.
So 250 grams of chicken generates 875 grams of carbon emissions.
And then something a little bit surprising was fish.
Fish is a major culprit?
It's number 4 in the list. Partly also because we do import a lot of fish, and one of the very carbon-intensive fish is actually the salmon that we air fly from Norway. The carbon miles that is added to flying the fish increases the carbon intensity.
I see.
Local fish farms produce only 9% of the fish we eat. Everything else is imported. Per ton kilometer, air transport is 9 times more carbon intensive than land transport, and 50 times more so than sea transport. I want to find out if people in Singapore know the carbon impact of what we eat.
So I've got a series of foods here, and I was going to ask you to arrange them in order. Which do you think has the highest amount of carbon footprint, and which is the lowest?
Would you give me a hint?
Just take a guess. So what should be at the top? Okay, the beef. All right, the beef's going all the way to the top. You're very confident about this.
Because meat is power easily, so I have to be transported faster. In general, I think it's meat, like meat, mutton, pork as well, I think. Yeah, pork.
So I think beef goes high.
Okay.
Probably the beef, the mutton, the pork to the right.
Okay.
The one with the high footprint.
For the most part, people know that red meats were the most carbon intensive when it came to emissions per kilogram.
Where do you want the rice?
The rice,
Near the vegetable.
Near the vegetables?
yeah, I think you're good. You're good.
You're good?
And I just feel like the vegetables.
And the rice should be less, I think.
And the vegetables.
To me, that seems about right.
So when it comes to carbon emissions by weight, the order goes like this. With the highest being beef, followed by mutton, pork, fish, duck. Leafy vegetables and fruits were the lowest. Then we decided to throw in a little twist and ask people to rank the foods based on emissions generated from the total consumption of each food item in Singapore. Because what matters isn't just emissions by weight of food produced, but emissions from the total amount we consume in the country.
So if I'm going to ask you to then rearrange it on the basis of not just about the carbon footprint per food, but also taking into account how much we eat, would you have the same list or would you change it?
I wouldn't change it as much.
So you wouldn't change the order at all?
No.
Rice, maybe all the way to the left.
The rice can come up a bit, right?
How far?
Fish and rice should replace fish. Yeah.
I guess I'll move rice over eggs.
Why is that? You think we eat more rice than eggs?
Yeah, because from what I've seen, a lot of people eat rice during meals, but not a lot of people eat eggs during meals.
Okay.
I would say rice, probably move here towards, maybe somewhere around here.
And eggs as well?
Eggs maybe somewhere here. Yeah, chicken here. I don't think people eat a lot of that. Yeah, about something like that.
But wait. Now then when you think about what we eat. Oh, wait. John, go for it.
Based on the consumption, so our diet, right, we actually consume a lot of pork. This makes it go all the way to the top. Second, which is quite surprising, rice.
Really?
Yeah, because
I stopped eating rice.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll stop eating rice.
So we eat a lot of chicken, it goes up to third. So we eat quite a lot of fish as well.
So that surprised me when I found out that actually fish has a significant carbon footprint.
So beef actually goes all the way to the fifth spot. After beef is eggs. Okay.
So quite a different story if you look at the emissions by total consumption in Singapore. Beef is no longer at the top. Instead, pork takes the dubious honor. Rice surprisingly comes in second, followed by chicken, fish, then beef in fifth position.
I'm quite surprised, especially with the rice.
Rice cultivation is a significant source of greenhouse gases. Apart from the burning of rice residues, such as straws and husks, fertilizers in rice production systems could promote the release of nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas.
I mean, there are many good reasons to eat a little bit less rice, but this is yet another one.
Yes, precisely.
If I want to be a consumer that's conscious about climate change, I'm a bit conflicted, you know. Should I be eating more beef or should I be eating more pork?
On a per kilo basis, the carbon intensity of beef is significantly higher than the pork. So if it's just a one-for-one substitution, you're just going to make the whole situation worse. Actually, the best way to go is eat more of the vegetables.
I see.
In Singapore, our pork consumption accounts for 28% of our food-related greenhouse gas emissions. Because we eat so much of it, 115,252 tons of it per year, to be precise. While all imported food generates emissions from processing and transport to Singapore, pigs, like all livestock, produce manure which eventually leads to emissions of nitrous oxide. It comes from the treatment and storage of the manure. That said, by kilogram, pigs aren't the greatest source of greenhouse gases.
I'm in the company of something that's a big contributor to climate change. Animals like cows and goats need management of their waste and housing too. But they produce most of their greenhouse gas emissions in quite a different way. As a doctor, I've had to study human anatomy quite closely. But today I'm going to try to explain the link between these animals' anatomy and their greenhouse gas emissions.
A cow is a ruminant animal, like goats, sheep, and deer. Of all the livestock, ruminants release the most methane, a noxious greenhouse gas. Why is the cow so good at producing something so bad?
Ruminants, unlike us, live on a diet of plants that are hard to digest. They rely on microbes in their stomach called methanogens, and these break down their food, releasing methane in the process. This greenhouse gas collects in their gut. They release this gas through both their front and back ends, burping and flatulence, but primarily through burping. So there you have it, these cows heating up our planet one burp at a time.
One cow can produce anything between 250 to 500 liters of methane a day. If carbon dioxide were the thickness of an average blanket, imagine methane as a blanket this thick. Methane is a greenhouse gas that has 86 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide, which we spoke about earlier, is another greenhouse gas, and it has 310 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. The only good news is that methane and nitrous oxide remain in our atmosphere for a much shorter time, and there's much less of them than carbon dioxide. But while our consumption of red meat like beef, pork and mutton is directly contributing to climate change, it's not just meat and methane we have to worry about. Earlier, John from A-Star suggested that we should be eating more plant-based products like vegetables and fruit, and less meat. But I'm meeting someone who believes that food's impact on the climate isn't as straightforward as meat and methane.
You get the hipster version, I get the traditional Singaporean meal.
Okay. Tell me about the foods that we have in front of us.
Avocado, largely produced in Mexico. So they use a lot of water. Water usage can be associated with energy utilization as well. You pump water that uses energy, right? You have to filter water that uses energy as well. Of course, a lot of fertilizers as well, which we all know fertilizers, of course, for the most part, is essentially from fossil fuels.
I thought you had the bad guy plate and I had the good guy's plate, but you're confusing me now. Some of this stuff is bad for the environment.
Yes, yeah. Quinoa is associated with issues of deforestation.
Tell me my coffee is okay. Tell me I can drink my coffee guilt-free.
Coffee can be quite high greenhouse gas emissions. Because again, the land use implications of this, depending on where you get your coffee.
Mass production of quinoa and coffee requires a lot of land, which in some parts of the world has resulted in deforestation and land degradation, both of which reduce the land's ability to store carbon.
So there's a movement to push vegetarianism and veganism as a way of dealing with climate change.
Right. It's not that simple, of course, right? Certain food products are associated with land use changes that are associated with greater greenhouse gas emissions. Like, for example, cutting down a forest. We have to kind of take note that there are potentially environmental impacts associated with increase in demand of particular plant products as well. And if we're not careful in how we're going to meet those demand, then we could very well end up, say, with a situation where, like, for instance, like we have an overexpansion of plantations like palm oil, which, of course, we know have significant greenhouse gas implications, right?
As global demand for food rises, the amount of land needed to grow plants and rear animals often requires us to do this. Deforestation is the permanent removal of trees to use the land for something else. Trees capture carbon, so removing them not only prevents future carbon capture, it also releases stored carbon into the air as carbon dioxide. To date, total deforestation accounts for up to 20% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. How much of it is going on in our own backyard? I'm going to meet someone who's crunched the numbers for the last 5 years.
So within Southeast Asia, we clear about 3 million hectares of land per year, mainly for food production.
And is this a number growing?
It's doubled since the early 2000s, and this has turned Southeast Asia from a major store of carbon to an emitter of carbon.
So our sort of role in the global carbon cycle has changed as a result of this deforestation.
Correct.
Why is the deforestation getting worse?
So it's due to many reasons. One of the major reasons is palm oil production. Things like potato chips, biscuits, sweets, gummy bears, for example, those all use palm oil. So palm oil is a major driver of deforestation within Malaysia and Indonesia, which is a large land area within Southeast Asia.
Palm oil is found in almost everything we eat, from pizza dough to chocolate and even margarine.
The other food products like rice production, for example, that can cause deforestation as well.
So every year, almost 3 million hectares of forests are removed in Southeast Asia, mostly for agriculture, roughly double of what it was 20 years ago. I wonder if we know how much land this really is, given that we spend much of our time in indoor environments like this. I devised a little experiment to find out.
Imagine that's an area of forest. How often do you think we lose an area this size?
Like yearly.
Yearly?
I don't know, every year.
Every year. It's much less than a year, let me tell you.
I think about every day.
Much less than that. It happens much, much faster than that.
30 minutes.
30 minutes?
Maybe on a per minute basis.
10 seconds.
10 seconds?
Quite fast.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. So every 5 seconds you think we lose a patch of forest this size?
Yeah.
1 second.
1 second? What if I tell you that you're very wrong and it's much faster than that? It's a second we are losing 20 times this amount of forest.
Oh, that's a lot. It's a bit scary, to be very honest.
I know that it was drastically losing away, but I didn't know that it was this much. Yeah.
I feel kind of like shocked and sad. I think we shouldn't like destroy the nature like this.
Yeah.
It should be stopped.
Yeah, it should be stopped.
But it's being done for our food.
Shouldn't there be alternatives?
Imagine that. In 1 second, we're losing more than 20 times this amount of forest in Southeast Asia.
Well, we can't undo all the damage, but perhaps there's something I can do this weekend to offset it a bit. But first, I've got to do some calculations.
I'm calculating how many trees I'd need to plant to offset the average carbon footprint of one person's food intake. In Singapore, our carbon footprint just from food is 954 kilograms per person. We are a country of almost 6 million. Based on this number, depending on the tree and how long we let it grow, I've come up with a few numbers. Time to find out what the right one is. Singapore intends to plant 1 million trees over the next 10 years. One of the reasons? To combat climate change. Because trees have tremendous potential to suck the carbon from the atmosphere. Adrian from the National Parks Board is going to plant some of these trees. I want to be a part of it.
Okay, Janil, so I think we'll just dig over here, okay? Yeah. We need to really loosen the base because we want the roots to be able to puncture that base very fast and try to get water as soon as possible. Okay. Yeah. So we have to keep the integrity of the root ball. Now we've got to slowly shift it in.
Tell me, how do trees capture carbon?
Okay, so you've got the leaves here. They're green, which means they have chlorophyll. And so with sunlight, water is going to go through photosynthesis, right?
So the carbon capture is really taking the carbon dioxide straight out of the air through the process of photosynthesis.
Yes.
Do different trees capture carbon at different rates?
Yes, they do. So what we are planting here are the pterocarps. So they are, in a way, hardwood trees because they have a high density of wood. So they store more carbon than, let's say, a temperate tree. And a temperate tree has the dormancy during winter, but tropical rainforest tree doesn't have that.
So the tropical rainforests capture carbon all year round at a similar rate?
Precisely.
So does the rate of carbon capture for a tree change over its lifetime?
Yes, it does. The good thing about planting a tree, right, is that it's young. And so it's vigorously capturing carbon, through photosynthesis. It wants to grow. It's just basically like adolescent. So planting a sapling is very good. So it grows very fast to the point where it becomes a big tree, then it becomes a carbon storage bank.
Right.
Then it's still sequestering some carbon, but it's not growing as fast. So that carbon capture is a bit slower at the point of maturity.
How many trees do we need to plant to offset our footprint from food?
We know that it's 954 kilograms per year per person, right? So in over 10 years, about 9,540 kilograms of carbon dioxide per person.
But at the end of 10 years, the tree is still capturing carbon and increasing the carbon capture.
That's right, yeah. So typically, a tree will grow, it will put on girth, right? And then at some point, it will stabilize. And if you take it to be at about maybe 50 years on average, where it really stabilizes, then you would need to only plant 8 trees, actually. Yeah.
So if I plant 8 trees, that will capture my carbon footprint from food for 50 years.
That's right.
But even then, 8 trees, I mean, for everyone in Singapore, that's like, what, 45 million trees?
There are currently about 7 million trees in Singapore. Plus the 1 million trees that we are aiming to plant, that's another 37 million more trees we need. Also, this scenario assumes that our population doesn't grow and that we allow the trees to fully mature for 50 years.
Do we really have enough land for 45 million trees?
Singapore is small, right? Obviously, there's a limit to how much we can plant, definitely, but we try our best.
Are there other limits to planting trees?
I've heard of stories where people have such ambitious targets, right? And what happens is that the care for the tree isn't calculated in. And we do a lot of tree management as well. Along the trails you see here, our staff are actually going in to inspect all the trees. So, I mean, you have to factor in this sort of things that may limit the number of trees you plant.
So Adrian and I planted 3 trees in about half an hour. It's sweaty work, but not impossible. It's not hard, actually. It's just physical. But do we have enough space for 45 million trees? We have to do this. It will capture carbon, and it will have a lot of other benefits, but it's not going to be enough to offset our total carbon footprint, let alone the footprint that we have from consuming food.
Well, we're already reaping what we sow. It's a vicious cycle. Our food production accelerates climate change, which in turn hurts the availability of food. Paul Teng co-authored the report warning us about this.
Climate change expresses itself in the short term, especially, for example, through what we call the unexpected severe weather events, especially in Southeast Asia. Typhoons are a classical example. But the other symptoms of the immediate effects are things like monsoons being delayed, extra rainstorms, drought periods, even uneven temperature. So all those affect agriculture. And then there's also the ocean temperature, ocean acidification. Fish that we all love to eat are very, very affected by temperature warming and sea level rise. When sea temperatures rise, the oxygen level in the oceans are affected, and fish tend to migrate to cooler regions. And it means that in the Southeast Asia region, our fish populations decline.
So are there examples of a weather impact on a particular food that we like to enjoy here in Singapore?
Certainly. I think rice is the best example because we all have to eat rice. And most of our rice is imported from basically 3 main countries, Vietnam, Thailand, and India. Most of Indian rice is what we call rain-fed rice. So very dependent on the onset of the monsoon. If the monsoon is delayed, planting is delayed, and there can be tremendous impact on how much they harvest in the end. Flooding is also a serious issue in many parts of India, but also in, let's say, Vietnam and Thailand. And flooding can cause losses, anywhere up to 5 to 10% of the entire crop can be wiped out. With sudden rainstorms, the heavy rain itself.
But are consumers in other countries starting to be affected by these problems?
The short answer is yes, they are. I think we see shortages of major staples, Philippines, for example, Indonesia, with much bigger populations, and also where the affordability is not as high as Singapore. But the longer term is what we worry about. Okay, let's say beyond 2030, because if we do nothing, in terms of global climate change, we're going to see more and more frequent unexpected weather events. So in the mid to long term, yes, we need to be very concerned, in fact.
We import 90% of our food. Inevitably, we're affected by the weather in other countries. And we don't have to wait until 2030 to see the effect it has on our food supply.
When I embarked on this series, I commissioned one of the largest and most extensive surveys in Singapore on climate change. We wanted to know if people in Singapore understand the impact of what we eat on the climate.
We found that only 7% of us said the environment was our top priority when it comes to choosing food. But 38% of us prioritized food prices. Well, the thing is, it's all linked. I'm going to meet the man who watches food prices like a hawk.
This one is Biome. It's a spinach. Very popular, as you know. Last year, it was about $1 for this particular bundle. Now it's $1.20, which is actually a 20% increase if you look at it that way.
And is that price rise linked to climate change?
If you look at what has been going on in Malaysia, there has been flood and rain over the whole of December till January. So that is probably causing significant disruption both in the production and the transportation of vegetables like these green leafy vegetables, which are getting too much water.
Are there other examples apart from the spinach?
Yes, absolutely.
These are from the USA.
This is probably coming from Florida. The temperature that you see out there is quite warm, with this warm temperature and with growth of other sort of insects. And what they are doing is it's actually moving to freeze to trees and destroying a lot of these orange crops. So you can see the prices here. It's 5 pieces for $8 that you see out here. Oranges have gone up by 7.5% on an average every year.
I see.
So if you could invest in oranges, that would be a great investment.
That's cod over there?
That's cod right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I check the price of the cod? How much the kg of cod is? $80.
So what's happening to the prices of cod?
So cod prices has been going up close to 5% a year over the last 10 years.
I see. That's quite significant. But how confident are you that the price rise is because of climate change?
Absolutely. So in the North Sea, because the temperature is increasing, the production actually goes down. Remember, these are colder climates. They are more used to colder climates. The production disruption means that automatically the prices will go up.
So there's just less fish?
Absolutely.
So climate change can affect so many different types of food?
Absolutely. What will happen, this is my honest belief, going forward, climate change actually impacts food prices tremendously. You will see that most of the population, where food forms a very significant part of their budget, they will have to change their food habits.
Whether it's meat and fish or vegetables and grain, our food prices are already affected by climate change. We can try to produce food more sustainably, but there's a limit to how we control production overseas and how much we do locally. We aren't quite there yet. So it seems like we have to look at eating more sustainably. A group of scientists came up with a universal guideline for how to eat to sustain a healthy planet in a climate-changed future. A pretty specific guideline.
Their recommended intake of red meat per day was up to 14 grams. And according to the Singapore Food Agency's 2019 figures, we're currently eating more than 5 times that. We're also eating almost 3 times their recommended amount of poultry and seafood. When asked if they were willing to reduce their meat and dairy intake, 56% of our survey respondents already have or are willing to do so. As is Alicia Chan, the executive chef of a cooked food and grocery store in Singapore. She definitely knows her way around a kitchen, having cooked in top ones all over the world.
Even at My first few jobs in the kitchen, I was kind of horrified about the amount of waste that a lot of kitchens go through. Like, we would import fish from Europe and we would fillet them, but we would throw away the bones. And like, the carbon footprint on that fish, for you to throw away the bones and not do something with it, just doesn't do justice to the fish. So stuff like zero waste and sustainability have always been something that I've been quite passionate about.
I am getting her to take her sustainability journey even further, and so she's embarking on the climate diet for a week. If the whole world switched to the climate diet, we could reduce food-related carbon emissions by almost half, equivalent to taking more than 2/3 of all cars off the road for a year. But look at this. You'd need to whip out a calculator along with your cutlery for this. Not really feasible for someone like Alicia.
I would say at present my current diet is whatever is convenient. I don't really have the headspace to plan my meals.
To help her out, we found a team of technologists to automate as much of it as possible. Better.sg is a non-profit organization that creates tech products for good. They've gathered a team of 20 just to work on this.
How to make it easier for her, we had it broken down into just categories and ingredients, and Sean, the development team, actually came up with the generic list of ingredients that a normal user can eat on top of the data that we have from Climate Diet. I think to make it easier, it's to just make it intuitive for them, and it starts to become like a habit where she enters it every day.
Sounds good.
The team has created a mobile app called climatediet.sg. All Alicia needs to do is key in her daily food intake, and it will automatically tabulate the carbon emissions from what she eats. Chef Alicia Chan is trying out the climate diet.
What I'm having for dinner is just something that I've gotten that's left over from work.
This diet, devised by climate scientists and nutritionists from around the world, is a detailed roadmap for how to eat in order to sustain a healthy planet. But following the guidelines involves some obsessive attention to detail. Which is why I sought the help of tech team Better.sg. They spent weeks creating an app that would help Alicia track the carbon emissions of everything she puts in her mouth.
I went out for dinner with my friends. Probably the first proper meal I've had all week. Hey, so I'm trying to make good on my promise to eat less meat since yesterday's meat fest.
All foods have a carbon footprint. We can't escape it. We all need to eat.
Which is why some companies in Singapore are trying to do food production differently, like the famed lab-grown chicken. We made headlines around the world last December for being the first country to approve of it for public consumption. Investors are pouring money into agri-food tech companies in Singapore, placing their bets that the future of sustainable food will be in the labs, not the fields. While the main intention is to beef up Singapore's food security, could these products be a good idea for the planet too?
But will people have a stomach for this?
Looking at our survey results, nearly 2 in 3 are not willing to try alternative proteins like lab-grown meat, insects, and algae. Their main reason? Being uncomfortable about how their food was made. I'm going to talk to some of these companies to find out how they plan to overcome the ick factor.
How are you? Hi, Janil.
How are you?
I also want to know just how climate friendly are they?
I'm going to start with these. So are these meant to be crab cakes?
It's made with microalgae protein flour. It's made in a fermentation tank in a bioreactor. We grow and harvest in 3 days. Compare that to beef, 1.5 years. Water, energy, everything, you know, we are fraction of what the conventional protein is.
Microalgae are tiny cellular algae that photosynthesize and multiply in a bioreactor, a piece of lab equipment in which live cell cultures can grow. The result is microalgae protein flour, which is an alternative protein to conventional meat like beef and seafood.
What about the energy required for your bioreactors?
Energy required is only sanitization. The algae grows in room temperature. I think all of us are developing technology to grow food and nutrition in a metal tank. Why that is better is because the conventional food and nutrition is grown out in the wild. So we have to deforest.
I think this is meant to look like chicken, and I presume it is chicken. It tastes like chicken and looks like chicken.
It's actually chicken, so you're right.
It is actually chicken, lab-grown chicken.
In fact, we don't really like to call it lab-grown chicken. We prefer to call it cultured chicken.
Okay, so there is meat.
That's meat, but the difference is that there's no culling of animals, and it's a lot better for the climate. It's currently the chicken that is being shipped all the way from a particular region in the world across the globe. It's a lot more efficient if I could grow that chicken locally in Singapore for the local consumption. Each market could grow it locally for themselves.
Eat Just's chicken is made by taking cells from a chicken feather and growing them in a bioreactor. This mimics the inside of a chicken's body, allowing the cells to multiply until they can be harvested to form chicken meat.
I'm going to challenge you with the same thing. What about the energy input into your cell's culture?
We have empirical data. There has been tremendous amount of research that has happened. The quantum of carbon emission, the quantum of land requirement, the quantum of water requirement, it's significantly lower because it's in a controlled environment that you're doing that.
Is your chicken nutritionally equivalent to chicken?
Yes, it is. We also feel that it's not really exposed to some of the diseases which could perhaps come due to improper handling of the conventional chicken. So in fact, I would say it's a shade better from that perspective.
And last but not least, this taco.
Just by tasting it alone, are you able to pick up on what is the innovative ingredient?
I'm going to say lentils.
Actually, it's great that you mentioned that it tastes like a food product that you're familiar with, right? I think of all the ingredients that's put on the table, the one from my company is the most unconventional. One of the ingredients that is put in your taco is actually cricket powder.
Cricket powder.
Right? So it's actually a cricket that is reared in a closed environment and then is harvested and processed into like a powder, and then it can be used in any recipe. Protein is one of the nutrition values that is very high in cricket powder. 100 grams of fresh chicken breast contains about 30 grams of protein, but 100 grams of cricket powder contains about 70 grams of protein.
Crickets are Ravi's insect of choice because they are already consumed in some parts of the world. But their biggest selling point is they multiply quickly. So gram for gram of protein, crickets produce only a quarter of the carbon emissions that chickens produce. Cricket cake instead of chicken, anyone?
Eating is a fairly emotional thing. You're sort of putting things in your mouth. How do you persuade people that these crickets, chicken from a laboratory, these are not words that people normally associate with food, and you guys want them to think of them as food? How do you do that?
Is some form of consumer learning that's required or consumer education that's required. But once there's awareness, increasing awareness amongst people, there would be increasing adoption as well.
So what we do is that we speak to many restaurants, we speak to many bakeries who understand how this product can be integrated into existing food options, and they make food options like breads, pizza dough, pasta.
So you're taking something unusual, but you're making it then look like something very familiar.
Exactly, right? Because that actually removes many layers of fear.
So if you can get over the ick factor, these are reasonable substitutes. But there are plenty of obstacles ahead. like getting the product approved for sale, lowering their costs to be competitive, and getting the people to accept it. What can we do till then? Alicia has been on the climate diet for the last week. I'm checking back in with her to review how she did.
I was looking at the numbers, and you've come in quite well below the recommendation for the diet.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Were you able to log everything that you ate?
I would say I logged maybe about 80% of what I ate, but due to the nature of my work, I do a lot of tastings while on the go in the course of the day, which it was very hard for me to log, like I had a teaspoon of mashed potato or whatever it was.
Okay.
When it came to making a choice between a meat-based dish or a soy-based dish, it was very clear to me while I was on the diet that I was going to go for the soy-based dish.
You managed to have a fair amount of meat. I'm just saying.
Pretty much all of that meat happened on one night when I met my friends for dinner. Okay. But I mean, this is what's going to happen with daily life. You're going to have a social life. You're going to go out for dinner with friends. And you're not always going to have the option of having vegetarian options.
Was that a friction in your day, to have to think of every mouthful?
It definitely was.
If somebody was persuaded to try this, what do you think they would be surprised at most?
I think they would be surprised that it's not that hard and not that expensive if you put some effort into it. So maybe you can give them a list of dishes or restaurants or places where they can buy food that would help them stick to this diet.
The climate diet is a start. It's a framework that helps us make thoughtful choices. It will probably be some time before eating for the planet becomes a default rather than a challenge. But for now, I've learned that eating right can make as much difference as reducing single-use plastic or turning off our air conditioning.
From power to plastics, a lot of change rests with policymakers, businesses, and scientists. But when it comes to food, you and I hold power every time we put something into our mouths. The goal is simple: eat less of certain foods, especially those containing a lot of palm oil and meats. The best part of a climate-friendly diet is that it's better for our health. Imagine, reduce our waistline and reduce lifestyle diseases and reduce carbon emissions. And perhaps that is what the future should taste like.